Hello and welcome. This is the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin, Texas. My name is Luther Elmore. These Public Affairs Forums have been held at this church since it was first incorporated in 1954. Normally they're held on the second and third Sundays of each month, and we invite you to come join us for these presentations. Information about them is available on our church website, austinuu.org. We hold these forums in an effort to further the stated ends of this congregation, that is, to inspire and to nourish the mind and spirit, to serve social action, and kick us into concerns of social justice and welfare for all of us. We're very happy today to have a Public Affairs Forum with 4 distinguished guests who will talk to us about the climate crisis we have. From my right to your left, we have Travis County Commissioner Brigid Shea. From the University of Texas, we have environmental activist George Wunch. Very pleased to have a longtime proponent and supporter of climate issues, Austin City Council member Alison. And as we are seeing recently, with the rising of young people, we are very pleased to have with us local activist and student at St. Stephen's School, Matthew Kim. Obviously, this is an issue that faces all of us, this generation and generations to come. I've asked each of the speakers to give an introduction, and we'll go through the 4 speakers and then go back and say, what shall we do about it? And so we will start, indeed, with County Commissioner Brigid Shea. Brigid.
Thank you. A picture opens up on a close-up of a boy. As the camera pulls back, we see he's reaching for something on a road. On a closer look, it's his shoe, which is stuck to the road because the road is melting. This is an actual photo from India in May of 2016, which recorded some of the hottest temperatures in its history, 122 degrees. I invite you to think of this image as a metaphor for how we are all getting stuck by the effects of a warming planet, and how all of you and the next generation can help our world get unstuck. So, what do we need to know about what's headed our way in Central Texas? What do we need to be preparing for and trying to prevent? All the climate models agree we'll be getting much hotter and drier. So, for instance, how we use water will be enormously important. We know the old drought of record was from 1950 to 57. More recent drought was from 2010 to 2015. Do people remember seeing Lake Travis in 2011? That's our main water supply, and it was drying up into puddles. And we're also seeing a new phenomenon known as flash droughts, where the land and the ground dries out so quickly we return to a drought quickly after rain. But how bad can it really get? Well, according to Dr. Jay Banner of the Jackson School of Geosciences at UT, in a technical term, really bad. He's been looking at the droughts of the past millennium in Texas, and particularly looking at tree ring history. And in that time period, the state experienced mega droughts that lasted 20, 30, or more years. And the climate models predict that we will be seeing drought cycles like that in the future. So if we tie how we've designed our cities and how we live, anybody know what the largest use of water is in a large building, like, for instance, this church? Just shout it out. Bathroom, anybody else? Air conditioning. Most people aren't aware of it, but air conditioning uses large volumes of water, evaporates it off, and it's the phase change that produces the energy for the air conditioning. You can get more technical than that, but that's the gist of it. So, for instance, the UT campus uses about 500 million gallons of water every year, almost all for air conditioning, a little bit for irrigation, but almost all for air conditioning. The state capitol uses about the same volume. Just 4 county buildings in the downtown use about 10 million gallons a year. And we've figured out a way at the county, thanks to the city, to permanently remove that from the demand side. Instead of using treated drinking water for the supply, we've swapped it out with treated sewage, which is piped in the downtown through purple pipes. It's also called purple pipe water or reuse water. So we've permanently removed it from the demand side and are using water that would otherwise be discharged as treated waste. I mean, ultimately, we're going to have to come up with much more efficient ways to do air conditioning in general, but this is one way to stretch our water supply. So if UT, State Capitol, and the buildings, let's say a handful of tall buildings in the downtown, all did this, which is doable because the purple pipes go there, we'd save 1 billion gallons a year of water permanently removed from the demand side, and no one would even notice. Nobody drinks the air conditioning water. It's not like you'd notice a difference in the taste. So that's one of those low-hanging fruits that we can all do. So wherever you work, if you know people at the state capitol, if you know people at UT, talk to them about this. Urge them to do this. UT has converted one of its central chilling units, but it has not converted the remainder of them. And it can do that easily. The purple pipe supply line goes there. So we're also planning for the future at the county. The new courthouse building that we're building at 17th and Guadalupe is being made purple pipe or reuse water ready, so that when the line gets extended there, we'll be able to use it for that. So how much drier will we be? We're getting hotter and drier. That's our future. August, for instance, was the second hottest ever on record. 27 of the 31 days were 100 or above. September was the hottest ever, with an average 8 degrees temperature above normal. So we're already seeing it now in our lifetime. And the kind of cruel irony about all of this is we're needing more air conditioning just for these high heats to be tolerable. And air conditioning is one of the major sources of the most destructive greenhouse gases on the planet. Air conditioning refrigerants are 1,000 to 9,000 times more destructive than carbon dioxide, which is the main greenhouse gas. So have any of you ever had to have your home air conditioning unit recharged because it wasn't working very well? It's because the refrigerant is leaking. So here's another opportunity in your homes and wherever you work or wherever you know, wherever you shop. Imagine the amount of refrigerant that a grocery store uses. And the other thing that's not obvious to people, every machine that's got something cold in it, like a soda machine or a food vending machine that has to stay cold, that has a refrigerant system in it. Every water fountain that has cold water, it has a refrigerant system in it. So every building has hundreds and hundreds of refrigerant units in it, every large building. So this is an opportunity where you can start asking questions, and that is one of the things that we're doing at the county. We did pass a climate emergency resolution the week after the city council did, and one of the things we directed our staff to do was to develop a climate action plan. And part of that climate action plan is we're doing a complete inventory of all of the refrigerant uses within our county buildings. We have over 400 county buildings, and each of those buildings has multiple uses of refrigerant within it. If you're ever in a building where there's a lot of computers, they have a server room that has to stay cool. That has a refrigeration system in it. So every one of these places is an opportunity for refrigerants to leak. And every action we can take to stop the leaks and fix the systems is an enormous, enormous benefit for the planet. The book Drawdown, which I brought a copy of, identifies that as the number one thing we can do to begin to reverse climate change. And you can all do that in your homes. You can do that wherever you shop, wherever you worship, everywhere you go that has air conditioning. So those are just a couple of things that I'll mention. I will say this. With all this depressing, frankly, news about the future, I am still hopeful. I do believe that humans are wired for resilience. I think survival's in our DNA. And I am hopeful in particular about the next generation and their creativity and their passion for doing something about this. So I'm happy to hand the microphone next to my younger colleague here for his thoughts. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Brigid. Hi, everyone. I'm George Wunch. I am a sophomore at the University of Texas. I'm studying international relations and sustainability with a minor in communication and social change. I'm the co-founder and co-president of an organization at UT called Students Fighting Climate Change. And essentially what we're trying to do is educate the UT community and the greater Austin community on the severity of the climate crisis, which I think everybody in this room is pretty deeply understands the absolute severity of the situation we find ourselves in today. And I find that in focusing on the sort of educational aspect surrounding climate change, especially being at a university, that's where you really start to get in contact more with people. That's where you start to get in touch more with people, because I've found that there's so much demand for action on this issue, especially at UT, especially in like people in my generation. And I find that demand for action kind of has been steadily rising. And the minute that you give people opportunities for action that suit where their interests lie, that suit something that's not just going out and protesting for somebody that maybe doesn't have the time or the ability to do that suits a broad spectrum of needs and interests, then you can really get everybody involved in the fight for climate action. And so what our organization does is we have 3 campaigns: a political campaign, an education campaign, and a media campaign. And what essentially the cornerstone of all those things is education, because where I see us right now, what needs to happen for tangible action to occur, I think we all know that action isn't necessarily occurring in the Texas state capitol, and it's not occurring in the U.S. capitol. It's occurring here. It's occurring in grassroots places. It's occurring on the ground, and it's occurring in communities. And it starts with creating connections with people. It starts with building community, and it starts with a cultural shift. And part of that cultural shift has to be education. And so what we're trying to do with all of our different campaigns is the most important thing of that is building community and uniting them around this common threat, this existential threat of the climate crisis. And especially, being at UT, and I'm sure Matthew can attest to this, and I'm sure a lot of people can attest to this, being a younger person at this moment in history, it's weird. It's really, really odd. And it's odd waking up every day, going to school with just sort of like this looming threat of a climate crisis, of you look into your future and you know that it's not looking too bright. But if anything, I feel like our generation has reacted so well to that, surprisingly. I mean, there's been a lot of different side effects, maybe. I will speak very openly about mental health issues. I've definitely struggled with my fair share of mental health issues because of the work I do, because of the climate crisis. And I know plenty of people that have that same feeling. But I think the most important thing we can do with that is really build community around that. Uniting behind this common enemy. And in a time in our world and our nation where we're so deeply divided, this is honestly the great unifier, is the climate crisis. And I mean, the climate crisis affects every single person, no matter what. No one's going to be safe from it. And so I find that the moment in time that we exist in right now it's scary, it's uncertain, but it's also a really amazing opportunity. It's really a catalyst and an impetus for change to occur on a large scale movement like we're seeing right now. I mean, the global movement, the global youth movement that's going on around the world right now is so inspiring, it's so empowering, and it's so amazing to see that we're not alone, that we're really, when we go out, Students Fighting Climate Change, our organization, every single Friday we do protests in front of the UT Tower. And whenever we go out there, I know that there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people just like me, just like every student that goes to those strikes, uniting around the world. And that it's not just students, it's people of different generations, of different backgrounds, of different perspectives, uniting behind the common threat that is clouding our future. And so I think that really the cornerstone for where we are right now is educating people on this crisis and building community and uniting behind that crisis and promoting action and working as hard as you can to make a sustainable future. And with that, I will pass the mic along. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Alison, and it's my honor and privilege to represent District 10 on the Austin City Council. I'm so pleased to be here today on this panel with my new friend George, but with Commissioner Shea, who's been a mentor to me, and with Matthew Kim, who I consider one of my mentees on this issue. And when we were invited to be on this panel, it was expressly stated that this is an intergenerational issue, and it's one that we need to solve working together. And so it's really exciting to be here today with all of you. So anyone who knows me well will know that I like to tell things like it is. I'm honest, that's who I am. I don't like to beat around the bush. The climate crisis is an emergency, and we have to treat it like one. That is why I led this summer's declaration of a climate emergency by the city of Austin, which joined over 900 jurisdictions and was the first city in the South to declare a climate emergency. We were soon followed by the county. And that is part of telling it like it is. The city of Austin has been taking actions for many years, and that's all great. But when you call something an emergency, you have to mobilize in a different way. And we are working at the city to figure out how do we accelerate what we've been doing well to get us to our goals faster. It's not enough to go through a straight line to net zero by 2050. We need to bend that curve so we get the biggest bangs faster. And so that's kind of what we're going to be looking at. I want to reflect for a moment on the climate crisis and really, remind us that this is hitting home here in Austin. It's not just that the scientific consensus is clear that our Earth is warming. We see it right here in our own city. In August of this year, 27 of the 31 days of the month saw temperatures over 100 degrees, making it the second hottest August on record. The last 5 years are collectively the warmest in modern history. July 2019 was the hottest month on record. What was once a 100-year flood event in our city is now regularly a 25-year flood event, or 2-year flood event for that matter. But here in Austin, we've been taking action in part because of Commissioner Shea's leadership when she was on the council. And I want to pause for a second to remember, some of the things that we are doing right and where we're leading. The rest of the country looks to Austin as a leader on sustainability, as a leader on climate action, and that makes the steps we take now that much more important. But I think it's important for us to recall the work that we have been involved in. So we've been proactive on climate change since at least 2007. And despite a growing population and GDP, greenhouse gas emissions have fallen between 2013 and 2017. By 2020, we're on track for a 22% reduction in emissions from the 2010 baseline. We have established a zero waste goal and master plan to divert material from our landfills, which is contributing to our net zero goals. It is supported by a universal recycling ordinance and the expansion of curbside composting. We can almost all of us can now curbside compost, and I know for my own household, which just started this in September, it's making a big difference, and we can really see how our trash is divided and make different choices. Austin is one of 25 cities to be part of the Bloomberg Philanthropies American Cities Climate Challenge. The council has endorsed the tenets of the Green New Deal. The city is currently working to respond to council's direction to build climate resilience throughout the community. And Austin continues, as I mentioned, to be recognized for our sustainability practices. So I'm a trained economist, and I think it's really important as we think about our next steps that we recognize that we're at a really interesting point in time. We're at a point in time where the economics align with the environmental. Now, in everything I do in the city, try to make sure we're being fiscally sustainable, but I'm really heartened, and we have such an opportunity to accelerate what we're doing on climate change now that the economics is lining up. It is simply more cost effective for us to take actions. It is simply too costly for us not to take actions. This is one of the reasons that I have led on work that we're doing to electrify our mobility system so that we can be ready as we shift to electric vehicles, all the way from light duty trucks all the way down to people's cars. That kind of shift doesn't happen without planning and preparation. In Austin, we have the benefit of owning Austin Energy, and so we can make sure that when we shift to electrification, we're using solar and wind. We can take advantage of that shift to electric vehicles to make sure that we can rely even more on solar and wind by integrating our grid. But we cannot do that. Thank you. We cannot do that unless we're prepared. And so that's some of the stuff that we're working on. And those kinds of changes, though, the emergency declaration, the electrification of transportation, those things don't just happen because I make them up in my head as a council member. They happen because we have environmental advocates who are out there in the community working with us to work with other council members, work with our city staff to fashion policies that can work, but also to put the political pressure to say we need to pay attention to climate change, we need to pay attention to the environment, and these are some things that we can get done now, and we're willing as a city to make these investments, and we're willing to step up and help the city to navigate and to see clearly a vision of where we can go. So as we're thinking about things that we can do, and as I'm talking today, I may talk a lot about what the city can do, but every time I'm talking about that, I want you to remember that we do that because people like you show up, and you say that we have to pay attention to the environment, that we have to increase our renewable energies, and that participation is really, really important, and I'll probably say a little bit more about that later, so thank you.
Hi, my name is Matthew Kim. I'm a junior at St. Stephen's, and I'm co-founder of the Austin Climate Coalition, and where we organized the last climate strike at the state capitol. And I'm also co-founder of another, it's a chapter in Austin, Students for Climate Action. And with Students for Climate Action, I and other students have met with public representatives like Councilmember Alter and other city council officials, city council members, to talk about the issue of climate change. And so I'd just like to begin with how, youth, we think about climate change. So in my lifetime, in most of my fellow students' lifetime, especially here in Austin, we've experienced a lot of climate change events. So the first one I can think of is the fire in Bastrop, where I was in first grade, and I remember a couple of my teachers, they had to actually evacuate their homes, and we were worried about them because, there are teachers and I'm in first grade and I don't really know what's going on, and they said there's a big fire there. And then later on, with the Memorial Day flood in 2015, I remember some of my friends, they had their houses flooded, and I was like, this is so strange, And then further on, 2017 with Harvey, when Harvey hit, that was a huge deal with Texas, and I was very surprised that, in the next legislative session in the Texas Congress, they barely really talked about, trying to stop the next Harvey, or trying to, at least bringing up the issue of, is climate change, related with Hurricane Harvey? And I'd like to say that it is, and some reactions from other students and I, one that I think is very powerful is that people are now kind of thinking about, whether they will have kids or not. And I think that's an important thing to think about, because why are high school kids, why are 15, 16, 17-year-olds thinking about whether they will have kids or not? They should be thinking about their high school, their future, stressing about college. And, when you're thinking about whether to have kids, that's almost like, family. You're really putting yourself out there. And I think that's important to recognize. And I remember when I listened to other people speak and say, they don't believe in climate change, I think it's just like mind-boggling to think, because there's so many reasons. And even if they don't think a particular aspect is real, you can really see there are specific examples all around the world where you may not think it's related, but like it's a climate crisis, because places in like India, Chennai, India, they're almost out of water, and it's 5 million people living in that city. And remember South Africa, they were running out of water as well, and especially here, we were close to running out of water. And all of these events, I consider them a climate crisis. I would consider them, reasons to say that climate change is real. And I hope you all think of that as well. And just now for what I've kind of been doing, when I've seen all of these things, when I look at the world, it makes me really want to try and make a difference. And that's what kind of motivated me to help organize the climate strike and reach out to people in my community to talk and have that talk and trying to further the discussion. Because I think that, once you start talking about it with people, once you make them start thinking about it, eventually I think they'll start recognizing that there's a problem. And I think of it, especially in my school, where I kind of made composting a really big thing. And I remember, there was this little tiny bucket that no one really cared about. And I was like, why is this a little tiny bucket? Everyone should be composting. And so I kind of made a whole bunch of announcements and made all of my friends compost and also, take the food out with me. And I hope that, every single day that people in my school went to the compost, they at least had like 1 second of thought and was thinking, what am I doing? That food waste is an issue, that, I'm trying to sequester carbon to help my future. And I really hope that, that little impact, that little thought has changed people's lifestyles and, made people more aware of their food waste and more aware of how they, act and how they can contribute, or not contribute to, but help to alleviate, the stress that we're putting on our environment. And I think that, as a student, I, of course, have a lot of other things I'm thinking about. But, now that this issue, with Greta, we have all these role models, it's really become one of the top things, one of my top priorities, if not the number one priority that I think I have to deal with in my life and that many other of my fellow students are thinking about. And so I hope that, in the future, when you see some students or young people, you'll support them. If you see another strike happening, you'll support the strike. And I think that, now we have all this power, and I think that we'll be able to get a lot of stuff done, especially, here in Texas, here in the city. And luckily, the city's already helped us out with, the climate emergency. And now I guess we just have to look at the state. So thanks.
Thank you. And now I'd like for each of the panel to just take 2 or 3 minutes and mention and to either specify or elaborate on specific things that we can do collectively or individually. We start over with Ms. Shea.
Well, I've talked about the advocacy that you can engage in around water conservation, similarly with air conditioning refrigerants. But I want to just really build on what Mr. Kim said about composting. When we throw food waste into the garbage, it goes to the landfill and it becomes methane gas. It's really hard to capture all the methane gas that's coming out of landfills, and methane is at least 22 times as destructive as carbon dioxide. So that's just a simple thing you can do every day in your home. I think almost everybody has the compost containers in their homes. Most everybody now has the curbside collection. Is that correct? I mean, we got them years ago. But That's a simple thing you can do in your home, and you can also help educate your neighbors about why it's so important, because the methane that's given off from decaying food waste is enormously destructive as a greenhouse gas. So it can be sequestered and turned into a soil amendment. That's what compost is. You pay a lot of money for it at the Gardenville or wherever the garden store is. So that's just one simple thing. Another thing that relates on a large scale, as there's a greater and greater trend toward more renewable energy, the oil and gas industry is seeking new markets for its product. And one of them is plastic containers. So the proliferation of plastic water bottles has become an enormous problem for the planet, both for the harm it does to marine life and the ongoing and unnecessary use of fossil fuels for a throwaway product. It's really simple to get a reusable water bottle and carry it with you. I make a point of it partly because it's more convenient. I don't have to buy a plastic water bottle every time I need more water, but those are just some really simple things that you can do. And every time I go to a store now that has discontinued, and this is an important thing where you've got to connect the dots as well. A number of cities in Texas had passed bag bans, single-use shopping bag bans. In rural agricultural communities, it's because the plastic bags were blowing across the fields. Animals were eating them and choking on them. They were getting caught in the cotton harvest and contaminating crops. So there were very real reasons why these agricultural communities banned plastic bags. It wasn't because they suddenly became, tree huggers. They had very real harm that was happening in their community. The legislature, which I'm sorry to say has become such a tool of the oil and gas industry, banned these laws, overturned local control, which they claim they care about so much, and banned these laws that would require the use of reusable shopping bags in order to cut down on plastic pollution. But it's because the oil and gas industry is opposing any of these efforts because it hurts their ability to have new markets for the consumer use of fossil fuels. So I bring my reusable bags everywhere I go, and if I'm at a store that has discontinued it, I make a point of saying, please tell your supervisor I'm very unhappy that you have discontinued offering reusable bags for your customers. And I'm not going to take one of those plastic bags because it harms the environment and it chokes marine animals and it's harmful across the board. So and we all go shopping. I mean, when everybody buys groceries, it's an opportunity every time you spend money or have an engagement with a business to do a little bit of education and send a message to the management. So those are just a few things that you can do.
I think all those solutions are undoubtedly incredibly important. I think everybody should recycle. I think everyone should compost, ride their bike as often as possible, and do everything they can to reduce their individual carbon footprint. But I think by focusing on those actions specifically, it's easy to sort of, that's how you shift the responsibility and the blame of the climate crisis from these corporations and institutions and policies onto yourself and onto your fellow community members. And I think what we really need to focus on is, especially with the time we have left to attempt to mitigate this crisis and adapt to this crisis, is to focus on broad systemic change. And obviously, that doesn't come easily. That doesn't come easily at all. But the way that you achieve that is two things. One, engaging with conversations with people in your community, with your family, with your friends, with people that you don't know, and bringing the climate crisis to everybody's consciousness so that they're thinking about it every single day, all the time, and it affects every life decision that they make. Because if people are aware and educated on the interconnectedness of every single issue that falls under the umbrella of the broader climate crisis and how the climate crisis essentially translates to life itself, every single aspect of our society, every single aspect of our civilization, every single aspect of this individual community to Austin, to Texas, to the U.S., and past that is affected by the climate crisis and will be changed and altered and already is being altered by the climate crisis. And so bringing that issue to the forefront of people's consciousness and getting them thinking about it every single day is so vitally important. Anytime you have an opportunity to share information, to engage in a conversation, to engage in a dialogue about these issues, it's so important to changing the culture around this issue, because we need to depoliticize this issue. We need to make it a conversation. We need to get everybody talking about it. The other one is voting. Everybody needs to look at local elections, at city elections, at state elections, at national elections, and they need to find the candidates that, and I mean everybody in this room is pretty good about doing this, they need to find the candidates that recognize the severity of the issue and support tangible, systemic solutions that support the community, that recognize the inherent inequality behind climate change, and that actually creates action on this issue. And so engage in conversations, vote, run for office. And also recycle, compost, all those things. But really, really what we need to do is we need to remember that we as individuals aren't to blame for this issue. The systems and the institutions and the corporations that have been in place for decades got us here. And we need to get the people in power that have allowed this sore to fester for so long, to the point where we're at a tipping point that we need to vote them out. We need to get new people in power, and we need to create change, because without new people in power, without new ideas, without new perspectives, without new attitudes, then we won't be able to dramatically shift our society and our politics and our culture towards something more sustainable. So, yeah.
So I want to focus a little bit less on the individual daily live actions that we can take, because I stand here as a city council member and as someone who wants to help lead us to take action on this climate emergency, and I need your help. Those of us on the council who care about the environment need you there with us advocating. We need your voices. And so I want to just focus your attention for a second on some of the things that we need to be working on in places where you might be able to join us. So one of the most important actions that we can take to reduce and stem the effects of climate change is getting to net zero. We have a goal of getting to net zero by 2050. We need to get there faster, and we need your help getting there. We are going through an update to our community climate plan. You can learn more about that at austintexas.gov/climate plan. There's all sorts of opportunities that are just launching for the community to be involved in those conversations. As a council, in our emergency declaration and in our electrification of transportation, we provided direction to try to achieve those goals faster, but we need you in there talking with our sustainability office and the folks leading that effort, reinforcing that desire and helping us to navigate the ways to do that. One of the ways that we are working to get to net zero faster is through our renewable energy goals, and I'm proud that by December 2020, we will already be at 61% renewable, which gets us pretty close to our 65% by 2027 goal, but we need to keep going. We need to continue to work to close the Fayette plant. And I want to go back on that point to something I said earlier. That doesn't just make environmental sense, it makes economic sense. And as the economic and the environmental converge, we're going to have some opportunities that we're going to need to seize moving forward to get to our goals. I've already mentioned the mobility electrification. That's another area that we can help. We passed Water Forward, this amazing integrated water resource plan that's going to help Austin have water for the next 100 years and not rely on importing it from other places. But there's lots of steps along the way, and there's lots of forces that are working against the implementation when we try to do things that cost money when you build. So we need you in there helping us to move the Water Forward plan forward. We are looking at creating a new and improved transit system in our city. There's a plan out there, Project Connect, and we need your voices to help shape that so it will be successful. I also want us to focus on the fact that we already have climate implications that we have to deal with. And Matthew mentioned the fires of 2011, and one of the things that I'm really focused on is wildfire. And we have an opportunity in the next couple of months to adopt a wildland-urban interface code, which would impact how we build in the WUI code in terms of the structures and in terms of the vegetation. And we need to get a real version of that passed that really helps us as a city to mitigate the risks of wildfire. And for those of you in the environmental community, we're going to have some tough conversations about that vegetation and what that looks like. And I need you in there working with me to solve both problems, not just thinking about one side of it, because we have a real risk of wildfire, which is a consequence of the climate choices that we've made. But we have got to come up with a solution that allows us to have the vegetation management that we need that is still environmentally there. We need to focus on heat mitigation. It's hot in Texas, and we need to make sure that we are taking steps and we have strategies through the tree canopy, through green infrastructure and cooling technologies to help. That is a matter of public health. And then on the trees, we have a beautiful canopy here in Austin. Let's get 1 million more trees. It's one of the clearest things that we can do as a city for public health. And then finally, I see a lot of folks who have been active in this field for a really long time. And I want to invite you to reach out to those who are younger than you and mentor them, help them understand where we've been, show them what you know, and then learn from them and work together as we combat climate crisis. Thank you.
All right, so for solutions, I'm a little bit pessimistic about individual action because I know that, since probably like the 90s, early 2000s, everyone has emphasized, individual actions, right? Don't buy a plastic water bottle, turn the sink off, don't, brush your teeth and have the sink running, right? We've seen that, that hasn't actually done anything. Although it is important, I'm not discouraging anyone from composting at their own house or, switching to buying from a renewable energy company. And I'm not saying that, you shouldn't refit your house to, have better insulation so you don't have to use as much heat or AC. But I think that we honestly have to focus on who our elected officials are, because in the end, the government actually has the most power to control the massive corporations and companies, the oil companies that are polluting our environment. And so as George said, the vote, I think the vote is enormously powerful. And, next year I'll be able to vote in the 2020 elections. And, I want to stress to everyone I know who can vote that they should vote, because they're voting for not only like the future of America for the next 4 years, but, for, when I become old and, what will the effects of today's laws look like 50 years down the road. And so when I think about what we can do right now, I think that we should focus on, trying to get the communities to change and also the governments to change, in particular Texas government, which is not doing the best for our environment and I think can be doing a lot better, such as like declaring a climate emergency, which is what was one of our demands for our Austin climate strike, in which we're still, trying to look for ways to get that to happen. And I think just emphasizing, especially the vote communities, all of that's great. And also I'd like to just share that the Alliance of World Scientists, they recently published a report in the Bioscience Journal that has it signed. I actually printed out a copy here, but 11,258 scientists from 153 countries signed this document warning the world about the climate crisis and declaring it the crisis a climate emergency. And they focus specifically on 6 different things, problems that we have to overcome. So one is energy. And so moving quickly to more efficient energy and better conservation practices, and, keeping fossil fuels in the ground, of course, and then also reducing short-lived pollutants, and short-lived pollutants meaning like soot and, methane, things that we can do to just we can actually reduce, I think, over 50% of our carbon emissions or the short-term warning over the next couple decades. In addition, nature, protecting our remaining primary and intact forests, because those are the places where our carbon is being absorbed and sequestered and taken out of the atmosphere. And when we're looking at things like the Amazon forest, rainforest, and then the other forests in like the Arctic, the tundra area, they're on fire, and that's a huge concern that we should be looking to. And then also food. We've talked about composting, but in reality, food is a huge source of all of our waste. And they specify switch from meat to vegetarian, or do like vegetarian Mondays or something like that. But we should also focus on making sure we don't waste as much food, because the USDA actually estimates that we waste 30 to 40% of our food supply. And then finally, last two things are the economy. And so we need to shift our goals from, emphasizing, growth over the environment to, environment's the number one priority. And then the last thing is population. I mentioned that some of my friends, I guess, are saying that, they don't want to have kids in the future. And that's because if we have too many people on the earth, the earth can't support that many people. And we need to start thinking about ways to try and, although it's kind of weird to say this, but try to limit our population in a way, because, we're using too many resources will be a bad thing. And how are we going to have more people if we're already destroying the things and we can't keep up with supporting the people we have today? And so when I look towards solutions, trying to think globally and locally. And in addition, I'm glad, we have Councilmember Alter and Commissioner Shea here to give support for it. So thanks.
Unfortunately, we only have about 7 or 8 minutes for questions, and so keep your questions very short. Come to the mic up front if that's close. On this side, I will come and bring the mic to you.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists, for being here today. I want to point out to the audience that you have a handout, and it has a list of things on here that are able to do, and some of them are very pertinent to what's been talked about up here. First, the climatemobilization.org, really specific things on how you can act to make changes. The Fayette coal plant was mentioned. We have a group here today, Austin 350, who has a table out there, and they'll help you. You can help them close down the Fayette coal plant, which produces 4 million metric tons of CO2 into our atmosphere per year. Also, 74 major medical groups give very specific things we can do to protect the health of the people who are suffering from the climate crisis. I think Councilmember Alter mentioned the working group for the City Council to get recommendations for changing the way we get energy. There's I think the third one down on this has it underlined. You can see what they're doing. We have members of that working group here today. Go to those meetings and tell them you want no more fossil fuel use. And so there are several other things. The Austin and Travis County climate crisis resolutions that were referred to today are mentioned in here. Those are critical documents that are steps forward, inviting people to come forward, read that document, and help these people make those things come true. And it can change our whole lives. And the last is, there's a resolution here from Windsor Park about how their neighborhood is calling for a climate crisis set of resolutions. If every neighborhood in the city did a climate crisis resolution and talked about steps, or every school in the community did a climate crisis resolution and talked about specific things to do, then the unity we talked about and the organizing we talked about that has to take place to save our planet would get a huge jump start. So take this home with you. On the back is a sample of things you can pledge to yourself and your community to make a difference.
I'm Hamilton Richards from the Citizens Climate Lobby. I'm also a constituent of Councilmember Alter's. And this question is for her in her capacity as an economist. There's a bill now in the Congress which Citizens Climate Lobby has been lobbying for 12 years. It is H.R. 763, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act of 2019. It now has 69 co-sponsors. And what it does is put a price on carbon and return all of the proceeds to the American people in the form of a monthly dividend. It bears quite a resemblance to the Canadian climate tax plan, which was on the radio this morning. Councilmember Alter, do you have an opinion about this sort of way of leveling the playing field between fossil fuels and renewables?
Thank you. I think it's a great idea and one that's long overdue. If we want to force change in people's behavior, we need to price it appropriately. We need to take into consideration the externalities of our actions, and placing a carbon tax would help in that regard. Given the current climate in Washington, without changes to who's serving in Washington, we probably won't get this passed. So as George and I think Matt both mentioned, it's really important that we vote for candidates who will support the environmental actions that we need. This is, again, though, another example where if we can align the economic and the environmental incentives, that we can accomplish more, and we need to be creative and think about how we can do that. So thank you for your advocacy on that, and my hope is that it will pass, but some things will have to change in 2020 in that election to do that.
We probably have time for just 2 minutes for one short question or comment.
My name is Scott Johnson. I'm an independent advocate for air quality and other environmental matters. The city has a vote coming up this week on a contract renewal for the Capital Area Council of Governments. They organize and manage a lot of the air quality programs. Air quality is the basis for climate progress. The plans that are in place, both by cities and counties and the region, even if it's great on paper, it may not be implemented fully. And this program has never been audited or reviewed. So this regional group called the Clean Air Coalition, with representatives from the counties and cities, gets together, but they're not necessarily reviewing and trying to update the plan and make it better all the time. So it's up to council members who have a connection to air quality, as you used to, through the Clean Air Force, to ask questions. So I would encourage you to look at this update with 3 extensions that are going to be voted on, fiscal year 22, 23, and 24, and decide whether that is the appropriate tack for the city, or they need to audit the Council of Governments Air Quality Program and look to improve it.
Okay, thank you. Matthew mentioned Greta, I believe a 15-year-old young woman who has inspired and engaged us, and so we have a short clip from her.
So no more? No more, okay.
One more quick question, very quick, sir.
That's all right, don't worry.
My name is Greta Thunberg. My name is Greta Thunberg. I am 15 years old and I'm from Sweden. I speak on behalf of climate justice now. Many people say that Sweden is just a small country and it doesn't matter what we do. But I've learned that you are never too small to make a difference. And if a few children can get headlines all over the world just by not going to school, then imagine what we could all do together if we really wanted to. But to do that, we have to speak clearly, no matter how uncomfortable that may be. You only speak of green, eternal economic growth because you are too scared of being unpopular. You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas that got us into this mess, even when the only sensible thing to do is pull the emergency brake. You are not mature enough to tell it like it is. Even that burden you leave to us children. But I don't care about being popular. I care about climate justice and a living planet. Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity of a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money. Our biosphere is being sacrificed so that rich people in countries like mine can live in luxury. It is the sufferings of the many which pay for the luxuries of the few. The year 2078, I will celebrate my 75th birthday. If I have children, maybe they will spend that day with me. Maybe they will ask me about you. Maybe they will ask why you didn't do anything while there still was time to act. You say you love your children above all else, and yet you are stealing their future in front of their very eyes. Until you start focusing on what needs to be done rather than what is politically possible, there is no hope. We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis. We need to keep the fossil fuels in the ground, and we need to focus on equity. And if solutions within this system are so impossible to find, then maybe we should change the system itself. We have not come here to beg world leaders to care. You have ignored us in the past, and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses, and we are running out of time. We have come here to let you know that change is coming, whether you like it or not. The real power belongs to the people. Thank you.
Those who are with us today, thank you for being with us. I think we have some other questions. If others had questions, and maybe our panelists would be entertained, if they have enough time, to entertain those questions. So any of you have additional questions of them, they're still here. You just come to the mic and ask them.
Okay. All right. I have a few oak trees in my yard, and we water them a bit. Should I could cut them down. That would take care of that problem. But how often, well, I have to have a question. How often do you water those trees in this climate? How often?
We need more trees. And we have to manage the urban forest as well, because if they're not managed, then they become kindling for wildfire. And what people are not aware of is that our region is the 4th or 5th highest urban wildfire risk region in the nation. And part of it is because we have such a lush urban forest. We have these great preserves that we've spent bond money and human time and treasure to preserve. But we also, that means that we have a lot of kindling when it gets dry and the trees die. So don't cut down a tree that's healthy. We need more healthy trees planted and growing and providing both the carbon capture and the shade.